The research on this one has been done, and there are two answers at the top of this hierarchy. These two answers, globally, determine whether people end up on an upward trajectory or a downward trajectory. Their only problem is they are politically incorrect, and so they are not taught as wealth techniques. Now imagine the perversity of that scenario. We have global findings that determine the top two things that will send you upward or downward, but we don't talk about it because it's perceived as unkind. The answers are, number one, work ethic. It's your own accountability. Do you choose to work hard? Number two is a fascinating one. Do you maintain a faithful family? That is the second most important determinant of your upward or downward trajectory financially. Now, of course, you can be a single parent and you can become wealthy, but if you do so, you are beating the odds globally. It is highly unusual. And by simply remaining married, most people on earth end up on an upward trajectory. That's a remarkable thing to consider. So as we go along, you'll find that there are a lot of very common belief systems that are out there in the public domain and are discussed as items of truth that simply do not hold up, and some things that we should be teaching that are never taught. Who's ever told you that being married is a wealth technique? Ever heard that before? It's number two. It's the second most important thing you could do.
I know it for a fact.
I fear there's a story there. Come on up to the front and tell us. So, the question we want to ask then, if we're talking about escaping poverty and becoming wealthy by your own volition, who's done it before? And what did they do? If we want truthful answers and we want to discover what actually works, let's find a group of people who have done this in the real world and study what they did. And possibly the best demographic to study on this one. Let's talk about people immigrating into the United States at the turn of the last century. You've seen the Titanic movie. At about the same time that Jack and Rose were boarding Titanic, groups of people were coming into the United States from different places around the world. And the poorest of the poor were the Jewish immigrants at the turn of that century. Now, I don't mean to say that they were poorer than your average American. Of the immigrant groups, they were the poorest. Why? Because they had just come from a failed revolution in Russia, most of them. The Russian economy was dying on its feet, and in addition to that, within the Russian political spectrum, they were by far the most targeted people and the most persecuted. They came to the United States with an average of something like $9 in their pockets, and that was less than the other immigrant groups. Within 6 decades, they were the wealthiest people in the United States. Now I want you to pause for just a second and think about what that means. I don't mean to say they were the wealthiest immigrant group. I mean they were the wealthiest demographic group in America. So they went from being the poorest of the poor to the richest of the rich in 5.5, 6 decades. How on earth did they do it? Well, what did they take with them? They did not take resources. They did not take money. They did not arrive to find any sort of infrastructure or old boys club that could lift them up. The only thing they took with them was their way of thinking. And there were a few distinctions, a few differences between them and the groups around them. Here's the main one. Jews read more than anyone on earth. Did you know that? Yeah. Why? Because as part of raising people within the Jewish faith, it was a requirement for every father to teach his son to read the Torah. It was a religious observance that every single family had to conduct. And that was the case even at the time of the Romans and the diaspora. And it has been the case all down human history. Now, as a result of that, that changed things for them. All through history, except for the point of the failed Industrial Revolution in Russia, Jews were the wealthiest people in any country they went to. The reason for that was they read more than anyone else, and they still do today. Of Nobel Prizes, 24% go to Jewish people. 24%. Folks, does anybody know how many Jewish people there are on Earth? I'm not Jewish. Do you know? Yeah, it's 15 million. Okay? It is less than 0 point something or other percent of the world population. And they have 1/4 of the world's Nobel Prizes. Reading makes people wealthy. Now, how do we fare on that one in South Africa? Right. Unfortunately, it's not that good. Exclusive Books ran a survey, and they asked how many people go into bookstores and spend their own money on books. And it turned out to be less than 1% of South Africans. Folks, that's the same as saying we don't buy books in South Africa. Less than 1%. There was a survey done more recently in terms of literacy skills at the various levels of education around the world. And they tested some 54 countries, out of which we came 54th. We don't know where we would have ranked if they had tested more countries. We were in the 54, we were 54th. The biggest concern is this. 8 out of 10 grade 4 learners in South Africa can't read. Why grade 4? Why is that an important increment to measure? Because in grade 1, 2, and 3, you learn to read. In grade 4, you read to learn. And that's a change. That's the change from saying, here's how you do it, to, there you go, the world is open to you. You can have all the answers you want now, all available. 8 out of 10 of our learners at that age can't do it. How seriously do you take reading in your family? Do you spend time teaching your kids to read and harboring the love of the thing? How much time do you spend reading? Average CEOs around the world read some 50 plus books per year. Has anyone here read 50 books this year? Okay, here's a little trick if you're not getting in the numbers. Do you ever listen to Audible, the audio app? I am a massive die-hard fan of Audible. I'm practically propping up the company all by myself. It's a little app that you download on your phone and you can listen to audiobooks on the fly. Anything you like. If you enjoy Stephen King, listen to him, Malcolm Gladwell, something about leadership, something about sales, something about becoming more prosperous, whatever is on your mind, the answers are out there somewhere. And you can listen to them while you're on a treadmill at gym, while you're in the bath, particularly uninteresting lovemaking sessions, whatever the case might be. I have a little 2-year-old son, and we have just now gotten him out of his crib and we bought him a little bed. And the reason we did that was related to reading. We eventually realized he's now old enough to follow stories, he's interested in little books, but if he has a crib, we can't sit next to him at night and read books to him. And we've decided that's important to his future, so this week we installed the bed and now that is the new way forward. I don't care what he reads. That's not the important part. The important part is that he loves reading because the universe is available to him. So this group comes into the United States and they go from the poorest of the poor to the richest of the rich. They maintain stable families, they teach their children to read, and the third thing, they are entrepreneurial in nature. More so than most people on earth. We perceive the idea that giving up a stable job and becoming your own boss is immensely risky. They see it the other way around. They say, well, that's like putting all of your eggs in one basket and handing it to someone else. I came across an interesting quote the other day, and I put this into the book, Poverty Proof. It's not my thought, but it's a good thought. Guy says, if you try 10 different businesses in your lifetime, 9 of them fail, and 1 of them works, you've become rich. Those were good odds. We tend to think of that in terms of pass or fail on the first try. And we think, well, look at the stats on failing businesses. What is it, 65% within the first couple of years? And we think, oh, too risky for me. If you try 10 of them and 1 works, you've become wealthy. Now, in the book and tonight, I'd like to talk to you about the idea of owning and running your own business in ways that you might not have thought of. Because for most of us, when we think of a business, there are repellent elements to that. We might think of a big corporate company and we think, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to be the boss of a big organization. Tonight I'd like to share some ideas with you that make you the boss that have nothing to do with that picture. And it's actually not about having a big company, it's about what we will call owning the sale. We will get to that idea. It is an incredibly important one.
If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and come back tomorrow for more daily tips in the series From Amateur to Expert.